Welcome, everybody, to another episode of MSP 1337. I think this is probably a unique and special episode. I'm joined this week by Tye Male, Senior Pastor of Wellspring Church here in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much, Chris.
So, as this podcast is entirely focused on the cybersecurity space, you recently had, for lack of a better word, a scare. And I think I'll tee this off with just saying, nobody is outside of the potential of being a victim. And so that's one of the four truths I'll talk about throughout this episode. My four truths are so eloquently taken from my friend Scott Augenbaum, the author of The Secret to Cybersecurity. Plug for him there. So, Tye, we were talking about this before we started the show. We went through this last week. It was not a pleasant experience. Walk me through sort of a little bit of the story behind how we came to be in having this conversation today.
Yeah, that's interesting. My wife and I celebrated 38 years of marriage last Thursday, August the 3rd, and we had an opportunity to get away for a couple of days. So we went about 3 hours away to a resort and just spent a wonderful weekend being away. And about 7 o'clock on Friday night, my wife shows me an email that came from me. It's even got my name. And
And they spelled it
I
right.
said, "Oh, they spelled my name right. Nobody can spell my name right. Tye, right?" So,
Yeah.
so she shows me this email, and in the moment, I'm like, I need to be with my wife, but oh man, I think this could be a problem. So I actually, I have to confess, I let it go. I let it go for about an hour and a half. And then finally, I was like, I probably should do something about this. And so I reached out to you and said, "Hey, here's what's going on. I heard from somebody else that
But funny
is
enough,
actually
at
in the
this
church."
point, I was already in the loop. So like you waited too long.
Yeah, well, I'm glad. I'm glad you found out. So here we are in a resort. Thank God my wife was tired. She pretty much went to sleep. Boom, I opened up my laptop and I went to work. And I'm sure there's some things that to try to solve this issue.
Well, I think the first thing that we should talk about solving is, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, we have to be vigilant and we don't want to be desensitized to the idea that when you get an email that you know is fake, that you shouldn't do something about it. Like just deleting it and ignoring it, yes, maybe you avoided being a victim, maybe. And I think that's meritorious in its own right. You saw
Well,
it as
Chris,
fake.
I marked it as spam. Okay, so do I
Yeah.
get at least one credit for that?
You get at a minimum one credit. So the interesting thing about spam and spam rules is kind of like getting a call from a solicitor and you go and block the number and then you get caller ID shows up and it's the same organization again, only they're calling you from a different number, right? So today it's whatever they're spoofing for the Tye Male at, and I think it even said at Wellspring, just like your email says. But what was interesting is that if you look at the actual address, not the alias that's displayed, it was like Tye.mail something something at gmail.com, right?
It even
Well,
had Wellspring. They even had
yeah,
Wellspring in
it
there.
did. It
Yeah.
was a great attempt at
Yeah.
spoofing your, and let me be clear, spoofing your email, not they have your account compromised. That's where the next steps could come in very quickly. And we know that from the body of the email and what they were trying to get from those that might have received this. But when you submit that to spam, yes, it's created a rule to potentially prevent you from getting another email in your inbox from that threat actor. But it doesn't prevent that same individual organization from standing up yet another new unique Tye.mail 37952ABC, whatever, and then creating the alias that makes it look like it came from you. So that's the first one, is that, your assumption that spam, great. Your ability to address that accordingly, awesome. The problem is that if that's where we stop, that assumes that everybody that you know that had gotten the communication as if it came from you is as vigilant or as understanding to that there are bad people out there. And so I think that's where this story takes a turn for the better, is that you were inconvenienced, right? And even though you were
Yeah.
inconvenienced, you paused for a moment to say, well, maybe I need to give this a little more attention than just mark as spam. So just kind of talk me through kind of your experience with sort of the next steps as I was trying to reassure you and others about this email.
Well, Chris is very a truth teller. If you watch his podcast on a regular basis, he comes at you with the truth, and in a text thread, it can almost sound threatening.
Right.
So
Like, don't be
he
dumb. Come
texted
on.
back,
Yeah.
yeah. We need to get on this, So I and he gave me instructions what to do. We need to communicate with everybody at the church. I can do that. I need to change passwords. And so I set about, I take my laptop everywhere. I open my laptop, boom. I started working on it. Here, the funny thing is, I was at a resort that, number one, my data on my cell phone, I couldn't tether to my cell phone well. It was just intensely slow. I didn't want to be on an open Wi-Fi. So I was doing all this with like five-minute delay trying to get into our mail thing that we use to
Which just
send
makes
emails
this
out.
worse, right? We're now
Oh
amplifying
man.
anxiety and
Oh
stress,
yes.
and now inconvenience has turned into instead of being able to respond in a very calm and manner with like, hey, this is the plan that
Oh
kicks
man,
into play.
Chris.
You're totally reactive, and you're like, the sky is
Yeah.
falling, the sky is falling, and I'm like, no, I'm getting on an airplane. Don't let that happen.
Yeah. So I went about first thing changing all my emails. I don't really I have two. So the church one, I have a private one. They're both happen to be Gmail. So I went in, changed the password. I changed them to 16 characters, complicated, strong passwords. I've been doing that for a while. Did you want to say something about that?
No, I was just gonna
Yeah.
say let's restrict how much detail we give about the changes that we
Okay.
make. But yes, that
Sure.
was
Okay, good.
that
I'll
was
do
sound
that.
advice.
I
That that
did
was
change it.
that was generic enough to say let's not tell them what your new passwords are. Okay, we'll just leave it at that.
Okay, I'll try not to do
Yeah,
that.
like
So then once I got the passwords changed, I was able to get into the website we use to send out emails. I was able, and that required multi-factor authentication, which took 10 minutes.
which
And then finally
yay.
got that. Hey, I was having so much fun by then. By now it's about 10:30, and then I have to formulate an email. So I formulate an email, and now I'm thinking like I've really never done this before. So I don't want to alarm people, but I want to alarm people.
Right.
Uh, Good information is better than some information better than no information. So I'm
Yes.
working through communication. Oh, by the way, I can do this on Facebook too, and I can post something up there. And yeah, so that's what I did, Chris. I got all that done. It probably took me start to finish about an hour and a half. And I felt good that when I finally closed everything, at least I had done what I could do in the moment.
Yeah. I like quoting Scott Augenbaum's book largely because his focus is on individuals. He spent his career focusing on cyber crimes that were largely financial, that were targeting people, right? Their 401ks, their bank accounts, very painful type scenarios, right? Losing $100,000 of your retirement, if that's your retirement, it ain't coming back, is a big deal. But he uses the four truths, and we talked about no one expects to be a victim. And let's be clear,
Yeah, right.
you were victimized or attempted to be victimized. You didn't truly become a victim. But I would argue that being a victim takes on many different stages. And the fact that you were inconvenienced is the first part of it, which inconvenience has a tendency to cause us to make decisions that are reactive. And in so
Yep.
doing, your anxiety and stress started to decline.
Oh man.
We technically could have waited a little bit. It didn't have to happen in that 2 hour window to truly make a difference. But again, the longer we wait, the higher the probability that no information becomes disinformation, becomes decisions that resulted in becoming truly a victim. And obviously you were not the target, right? They used your persona to target those that trust you. So now
That's correct.
now you've had trust. Now you have trust issues, right? Like, they have literally taken away the ability for someone to say, well, I trust emails that come from Tye Male because I've never gotten an email that wasn't trustworthy from Tye, and he's emailed me over the last however many years, 2, 3 years. And so now all of a sudden I am being put in a situation where the email I got was just a straight up lie. And it
And
wasn't
Chris,
from you.
when I read the email, my wife showed it to me on her phone. Obviously, I never got this. It never came back to
Right.
me.
You did
So
not, this did not come from you.
right. So when I looked at her, when I read the email, the first question I asked, I hope you address this, is there was no link, there was no scam that I could see. And I even said
Correct.
out loud, if it's a scam, it doesn't look like a very good one. And then the other thing is, and then this is where I probably falsely assume on the trust thing that anybody that gets this, especially the people that we know that got it from me, um, gosh, Chris, they've just got to know there's no way I would have sent this out.
Right. So let's talk about that for a minute. So the idea here is that this email goes out, it's taking on the persona of Tye Male as the senior pastor of Wellspring. And the way the email is written is that they want the person that's received this to take action by replying to the email, by essentially embracing or assuming that the trust link is present and that it's okay to dialogue with what is allegedly Tye Male. So this is a perfect example of targeted phishing. So the bait is literally, I am who I say I am, and I need your help. So it's kind of a timeliness factor. So we know that in our society today, we're very knee-jerk and reactive to things that are in email. In fact, we get a little bit bent out of shape when the response to my email takes more than 2 hours. We truly, and part of that is tied to generational differences, right? So email is not social media. Email is not, text messaging. It's not, Instagram and Facebook and these other messenger tools, WhatsApp, you name it, where we are in a live communication dialogue. Outlook, or not Outlook, but email is a very static, one-directional communication tool. So unless I actually ask you to respond to me with clear instruction of why I want you to respond, I should not technically expect a response. That's largely generational, right? So kids today, man, I can send them an email. I remember going on the Juarez trip and like sending out an email and like not getting a response for like a week or at all. And then they tell me like, oh yeah, I read your email and I'm ready to go. And I'm like, huh, I guess I didn't say in the email, please email me back acknowledging that you got this. I only said email me back if you have questions. So very much an age discrepancy here. Demographics are screwing with us right here. This email was targeting a specific demographic in those that it emailed. And I'm not saying that it knew who those people were, but the way it was written, it's hoping to hook somebody that is used to being very responsive to an email. This is where to your point, like it didn't have a link in it. It didn't have anything that seemed malicious. And so the skeptic might say, this must truly be Tye. There's nothing in here that raises the hair on the back of my neck even further. Which, by the way, if there was a link in there, we are very likely to want to click it because it's underlined and it says, click me, click me, click me, right? So the difference between this and a traditional spam or a scam attempt that would be phishing would be like, if I got an email that says your Amazon return has been accepted, but please click here to confirm that you wanted it deposited back in your Wells Fargo versus fill in the blank.
And it's
Now you're getting
interesting,
into,
Chris, I
go
got
ahead.
2 of those this week and I never get those. So it's very interesting to me that I forwarded you one and it looked it looked really real. Like,
So
oh man, I really need to take action on this.
So this goes back to the first one. No one expects to be a victim, and these are
Yeah.
all attempts at victimizing the those that would be unassuming, right? Like you just don't think that way about it. So that kind of takes us to sort of the next step. Like what would have happened potentially if someone would have responded to this email? Now the ball is in motion. The ball is back in their court to go, okay, I'm now reeling them in, and now I have to be careful so they don't spit the hook out, right? And so they're going to be very cautious now because the person has responded, And it may be even something along the lines of like, this is the phone number I need you to call, or you're going to get a please provide me with your cell phone. You're going to get a PIN number, or just any number of things that might seem like they make sense but don't. And then the older the age group is, sadly, the higher the probability that you're going to be victimized. And the reason I say that is, I'll give you an example. I had somebody close to me get a phone call that said, "Hey, the due to your results and you articulating through your visits with the doctor for solving for your back pain, we're going to go ahead and send you the equipment that helps relieve the stress on your back. All we need from you is your social security number to confirm, and we'll get this in the mail." Boom, just like that, they got you. And the reality is, they may actually send you whatever it was they said they were going to, but you probably didn't need it. But here's the thing: what person over the age of, say, 55 doesn't have back pain? Like, it's especially if you just went on a car trip. Like, I don't care how old you are. If you were in a car for too long, your back's going to hurt. So
Yeah.
they know they've
Yep.
got a better than 50% chance of reeling you in just by saying something like that. And you believe that they know you. So
Right.
that's where this goes. Gift cards, you name it, that's coming in the future emails, right? Okay, so I think we've buried this as far as like what could have happened. To be clear, in the case of the church, this could have been something along the lines of like, "Hey, we have somebody in desperate need. We're going to need you since we know since I'm out of town," or any number of things that you might have shared through Facebook or other social media. Which, by the way, if you're ever traveling, don't post anything while you are actually traveling. That's
Never. I
number
never
one danger.
post.
Is they go, "Oh, they're not home.
Yep.
Please
I
send me
never post.
$10,000 so I can get home. I lost my passport," right? Like, if you know somebody's traveling, like, it's good to tell people in advance that you're going to go somewhere. Don't put that on social media. Like, "Hey, I'm so looking
Right.
forward to going to the Virgin Islands in 2 days." Like, no, don't do that.
You know,
That's
there's really nothing quite like telling the world. And some people, to be fair, Chris, some people have 30 friends, and half of them have the same last name. The
right.
other half are married to the same last name.
Yep.
So to be fair, that individual is going to be a little. Well, I'm not going to speak to that. You can talk to that. But like, I have friends that I don't really even know who they are. So I treat my Facebook page. This is probably not where we want to go. So to
You're
bring
okay.
us
You're
back,
okay.
but like on Facebook, I treat my Facebook page as a fan page, and I
Sure.
assume there's people watching to see how they can get into my house when we're gone. Worse, terrorize my wife if she's there
Sure.
alone when I'm out of town. So I'm not very careful. I just flat don't do it anyway. There
So
you
no,
go.
that's actually a really good way to put that. So this gets into, with social media, how well you lock it down. Like, who are your friends? Like, when you post something, do you have it set to post to public? Do you have it set to post to friends? Do you have it set to post to close friends? A lot of people don't get that dialed in. And usually when I'm doing forensics for someone that has been victimized, one of the things I look for is like, how public was their Facebook profile? How public is their Instagram? Can anybody follow them? And what can they do? Be wary of friend requests. Like for example, if tomorrow, Tye, you sent me a friend request on Facebook, I would be a little bit concerned considering we're already friends on Facebook.
Chris, let me say something about
Yeah,
that because I know I look incredibly young. So thank you
I
for
think you're
thinking
probably in
that,
that
not
50,
saying it.
50 under
But
55
I'm
category.
I'm the plus 55, just so you know, and not to give anything away here, but I could be plus 60, who knows? But like I'm probably a little bit more hyper vigilant about some of these things, only because I've seen what can happen,
Yeah,
you know. But like as far as social media goes, I'm at a point now where I don't, because so many people know me and then I don't necessarily know them, that I just don't take friend requests.
sure.
I just stop taking them, Chris. And if somebody message me and say, "Hey, what's up?" then I'll do a little spelunking. But for right now, I'm just at the point where I just don't accept friend requests. It's just too risky.
And along those lines, be careful when you get any sort of weird content in any of your social media platforms. I'll give you an example. My sister-in-law, um, thanked me on LinkedIn for congratulating her on a job change from 2016, but the response was last week. So like
Right.
I read this and I almost responded. And I'm like, wait a second. I put this in LinkedIn in 2016. So I texted my sister-in-law and asked her, like, hey, when was the last time you logged into your LinkedIn account? And she's like, oh, it's been years. I'm like, your account's been compromised. I would go change account credentials for everything social media because there's a good
Yep.
chance that if you use some variation with LinkedIn, it probably is a variation of something you use with other social media accounts. And it's just a matter of time before they get into those too. So I think we've covered the reasoning a bit behind why we need to be very sensitive to this.
Yep.
Um, if you become a victim, the probability, this is truth number two, the probability of you getting your money back is almost zero. I've seen very few cases. I've seen cases where the victim had the money gone, the FBI got involved, and they were able to stop the money from getting to the bad guys or being used by the bad guys, but they were still unable to retrieve those dollars. So that's number two. The third one is the probability of anybody getting caught is slim to none. Even if we know who it is, they're doing it in a lot of cases out of countries that do not have extradition to the United States. So what are you going to do? And then the last one, and kind of where I wanted to focus for the last few minutes that we have today, is number four is that most cybercrime, or the majority of cybercrime, can be prevented. In fact, the number is so high, I will just leave it at above 90%. And so what does that mean? So you mentioned this at the beginning of the episode of making sure that you have good passwords. And good passwords is step one, but multi-factor authentication, as annoying as that might be, you talked about that with the platform for mass mailing. You need to do that across every application, every tool, everything that you possibly can use that's connected to the internet should, if it supports two-factor authentication, be turned on with two-factor authentication. We're human. You might be able to remember 5+ passwords. And I would say with that assumption on 5 passwords, they are probably variations of each other. Our brains are just not wired to remember complex phrases or passwords very easily. So you need to use a password manager. I'm sorry. And if anybody says like, well, I've seen in the news LastPass. Okay, sure. The probability of being a victim, like what was described in LastPass, is still a minimal in comparison to you being a victim because you used your anniversary, your birth date, your kid's first name. I mean, that's still a higher probability of being a victim. So take your chances on the things that you've decreased the probability. Not just because you saw it in the news, that means I'm not going to do it.
Right. Right.
The
Right.
second one is, and you said this, password complexity. So that's great. I would also say if you've got password and multi-factor on an account, you should still change those passwords at least once a year. Just and clean house. Like if you signed up for something, maybe it's Etsy or Pinterest or fill in the blank, and you don't use that account anymore, go in and shut that account down. Don't leave those accounts out there forever so that someday when, MySpace finally decides to upgrade and is more than a banned web page and your account was compromised, you don't remember what data you put in there 15, 20 years ago. It's still your data. So that would be like number one thing, or number one and two things to do. And then I think you've got one. I think you should share the one you were talking about. I mean, you're Pastor Tye. Share from the pulpit what you think should be done. I think it was out of Matthew.
Oh yeah. So when we talked about this a little bit before we came on, but like there people who follow Jesus, sometimes they just have faith, we
Sure.
just want to trust, and Jesus called us to love one another. And
Absolutely.
wow, if we're ever suspicious of somebody, gosh, that sure doesn't look like loving. But when Jesus was preparing his disciples to go out, he had this phrase that he used. He said, look, I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves. That's not a condemnation or a judgment statement. That's a matter of fact. This is
Right.
a fact of life. There are sheep and there are wolves. I mean, I don't think you have to have a Bible or believe in Jesus to know that. Just look around, watch the news. And then he says this, so be shrewd as snakes. Because of this, be shrewd as snakes and harmless as doves. So I think if we're not careful, we could just say, well, we'll just trust God with this. But Jesus himself said that there's a time to be shrewd and to be cognizant, aware, take necessary measures. But in the
Absolutely.
process, man, be harmless as does. Like we don't have to be jerks about this, but definitely be vigilant. And Chris, I thank God for people like you and people in my past that have helped me understand these things. Because otherwise, I would have wound up with my data stolen, all kinds of
Sure.
stuff.
I think there's a second part to what you just articulated, to be as gentle as doves. So let's take you being the victim away for a second, or leave it in place. There's two ways that I could have approached helping you. One is I could have said, Tye, are you serious? You actually fell for that? That is not
Yeah,
okay. In our industry,
right.
we have to treat everything as an opportunity to learn, not an opportunity to shame. We are,
That's a
and I say
great
we,
perspective.
I am not above clicking on the link, and I've been doing this for a long time. I have witnessed the worst of the worst, and I can tell you that doesn't make me impervious to accidentally or intentionally clicking on something that I think is good. I've even done it with fishing simulations that were intentionally fake to convince me. And I got the better part of me said, I know this is a simulation, but I really want to know what happens if I click on this link. I shouldn't have done that, even though I
Yeah.
knew it was a fake. So take that. If something has happened, if you're watching this and it's happened to you, I don't care if it was 6 months ago or a year ago, and you would like to get information, please don't hesitate to reach out. It's never too late to try to undo. There is no shame in sharing your story. In fact, I encourage anybody that's been a victim, share your story with others, because please let me tell you, you're not stupid, you're not crazy. It can happen to those that are the best at watching for these things happening. So like Tye said, be shrewd like the snake and watch out for the wolves. Wolves are pretty sneaky creatures. If they don't want to be seen or known that they're there, you won't know that they're there. So I think we've covered it. Tye, like, is there anything
Yeah,
else
that's
you
pretty
want to
good,
share?
man. You know, I love that. I love what you just said because I have to tell you, like I know I didn't do anything wrong. I
Sure.
absolutely positively. Well, and then in my mind for
I'm
the
gonna
next
give you a
hour, I'm just
pause. What you did wrong was you waited.
yeah,
To be fair, I shouldn't say what you did wrong. Now I'm shaming you, but what you could have done better. And I think
yeah, there
maybe
you
that's
go.
the big takeaway here is learn from the past, right? So if you waited an hour and a half to let somebody know, even though nothing bad happened, you know that if this happens in the future, immediately you've got a plan that you're putting in place. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to be in the reactive camp, you want to be in the responsive camp. And for those that aren't familiar with what those two mean, because they are very similar, they're kind of like locust and grasshopper. Reactive is very selfish. Reactive is all about the short term and what I can see directly in front of me. You want to be in a different camp. Respond means that Tye got this notification of what was playing. He goes, oh, you know what? I absolutely have a plan for this. And while you might start to feel reactive, that's a normal feeling, the fight or flight model, you know that you're going to tell Chris, you're going to tell your accountability, your board, like whatever. You're going to tell them right now, hey, be vigilant. Hey, execute the following three things. So that prior to this first incident, you didn't have a plan for this. You didn't know who you
Right.
needed to notify. So I just sharing that with everybody, like, yeah, I'm sure everybody's going to be somewhat reactive the first time this ever happens. But if you've listened to this episode, maybe you've taken like, hey, I haven't had this happen to me. But now because I listened to what Tye and Chris had to say, I've put in motion like, hey, if this ever happens, you call my spouse, you communicate with XYZ, and then you go in and start changing credentials for accounts. And that's what you do.
Good stuff, Chris.
All right. I think we covered it. For those of you listening, this has been an episode of MSP 1337. Thanks and have a great week.